Chapter 3. Tea in the River. "Why, Felicity," exclaimed Miss Manderley at their next lesson, "your invitations look lovely. What fine handwriting!" She handed back Felicity's copybook with a smile. Elizabeth smiled at Felicity, too. Felicity beamed. She was proud of the invitations. She had practiced over and over again until she was sure she could write the words perfectly. She forced herself to be slow and careful when she wrote in her copybook. Felicity was determined to show snobby Annabel that she was just as accomplished and well-mannered as any gentlewoman in England. As the weeks went by, Felicity grew to enjoy her lessons with Miss Manderley more and more. She especially loved tea time. It was a peaceful part of the day when nothing rude or unsettling could happen. The tea tray was beautiful, with blue china cups as delicate as flowers, and shiny spoons in the lovely china spoon boat. Felicity memorized Miss Manderley's graceful movements as she measured the tea out of the caddy. She longed to use the caddy spoon and to pour the steaming water into the pretty teapot. Sometimes Miss Manderley asked her to hand around the cups and offer the milk and sugar. Felicity was very careful. She couldn't wait until it was her turn to prepare and pour the tea herself. She wanted to do it perfectly. Felicity still loved to run and play out of doors. She was still quite often too lively to be ladylike. But at lessons, Felicity tried to keep her voice low and her back straight and her teacup balanced. She remembered to laugh softly and ask polite questions. She began to enjoy being on her best behavior at tea. Elizabeth and Felicity always had a great deal to say to each other, but Miss Manderley insisted they discuss questions of general interest. That meant they had to include Annabel in their conversations. Annabel was not very interesting, but she usually tried to be pleasant at tea time. She was almost always polite in front of Miss Manderley. But one day at tea time, Miss Manderley left the room for a moment. Annabel heaved a big sigh. "Well," she said, "so we won't have any tea to drink if these uncivilized colonists have their way." "What do you mean?" Felicity asked. "Haven't you heard?" asked Annabel in a mean voice. "A few days ago in Yorktown, a mob of colonists threw chests of tea into the river. The tea was on a ship that had come from England." "But why did they do it?" asked Felicity. "Because they are hotheads," said Annabel. "They were a wild mob." "They didn't hurt anybody," Elizabeth said to Felicity softly. "Quiet, Bitsy," snapped Annabel. Elizabeth shrank back. Annabel went on. "The colonists destroyed the tea because they do not want to pay the king's tax on it. I've always said these colonists are ungrateful for all our king has done for them. I've always said—" Just then Miss Manderley returned. Annabel stopped talking. She smiled sweetly at Miss Manderley. Felicity did not know what to think. Could Annabel be right? It was surely wrong for colonists to destroy tea they did not own. But wasn't the king's tax wrong, too? She looked down into her tea and said nothing. Felicity was still quiet as she and Elizabeth walked home after lessons. They always hurried ahead of Annabel so that they could talk. "Lissy," said Elizabeth kindly, "it wasn't you or your family who threw tea into the river. You shouldn't feel bad about what those other colonists did. It's not your fault." "I know," said Felicity, "but Annabel makes me so angry. She thinks colonists are no good." Elizabeth smiled a little. "I know one colonist Annabel admires," she said quietly. "Ben, your father's apprentice." Felicity stopped. "Ben?" she asked. "Annabel likes Ben?" "I," nodded Elizabeth. "Annabel thinks he is handsome, and she found out that he is from a wealthy family, so she admires him." Felicity laughed. "So that's why she lurks around the store and flutters her eyelashes at Ben like a ninny? Oh, wait till I tell Ben that Annabel is sweet on him." "Oh, you mustn't tell Ben," said Elizabeth. "Annabel would be so angry if you did." "I won't tell him," said Felicity. "Don't worry." Felicity and Elizabeth waited at Mr. Merriman's store for Annabel to catch up. They chatted about their lessons and horses and their samplers. But whatever they thought about Annabel being sweet on Ben, they began to giggle. It was very hard not to laugh when Annabel came into the store. She looked around. When she saw Ben was not there, she said briskly, "Come along, Bitsy, there's no need to stay." Felicity and Elizabeth smiled at each other and waved goodbye. Soon after Elizabeth and Annabel had left, Mr. Merriman began to close up the store. "You and Elizabeth are the merriest girls in Virginia," he said. "You always have a great deal to talk about." "Aye," said Felicity. "Today we had a wonderful idea for something to put on our samplers. Miss Manderley says we're to start them soon. We are going to need lots of red silk thread." "Are you going to stitch some red Virginia roses, red as the roses in my lovely Lissy's cheeks?" asked Mr. Merriman. "Oh, no," said Felicity. "Elizabeth says we should put a bright red crown right at the top of our samplers to show that we all look up to the same king. She says that he is fair and generous to everyone he rules, in England and in his colonies." "Well," said Mr. Merriman with a sad smile, "I am not sure everyone would agree. Many people feel the king is treating us colonists badly. They do not want to be ruled by the king anymore." Felicity was confused. "But isn't that disloyal?" she asked. Mr. Merriman shrugged. "People will not be loyal to someone who treats them unfairly, and they feel the king's tax on tea is unfair." "Annabel said some colonists threw tea into the York River," said Felicity. "Is that true?" "Yes," said Mr. Merriman. "It was their way of showing the king they are angry. Other people have decided they are not going to buy tea or even drink it anymore. That will be their way to show the king that they are angry." "Just because they have to pay a few pence more for tea?" asked Felicity. "It isn't only the tax on tea," answered Mr. Merriman. "We colonists built this country with our own hard work. Many people feel we should govern it ourselves, without the king." "Without the king?" Felicity couldn't imagine it. "Do you think we would be better off without the king, Father?" she asked. Mr. Merriman sighed. "That is the question everyone is asking." Felicity looked up at him. "Miss Manderley would call it a question of general interest," she said. "Quite so," said Mr. Merriman, "and I do not know the answer to it." "Well, do you think I should not stitch a crown on my sampler?" Felicity asked her father. Mr. Merriman handed her some red silk thread. "I think you must answer that question for yourself," he said. "Now come along, my child. 'Tis time we were on our way home."